Hey game developers, Chris Delion here of Gamedev, and what I want to talk about today is the importance of deciding up front whether or not the game you're currently building is going to be commercial, right? And here's what I mean by that, okay? What I'm trying to discourage is the attitude of, I'm not sure yet, we'll wait and see, we might release it for commercial or not, we're not sure, okay? You should decide up front, are you doing a game for free, in terms of release for freeware, release for just practice, or are you doing it commercially? And the reason why it's so important to make that distinction is because of the danger of if you get the, if it does turn commercial, you didn't count on it going commercial, then you can wind up in kind of hot water with a lot of people who worked on the game with you. Or to look at it from the other perspective, the very possibility that you might make a game commercial actually cuts you off from certain advantages and opportunities for collaboration, for support, for mentorship, and so on that might be afforded to you if the game you're doing is at a practice level. Okay. Besides which, you don't want to bring a unfunded game to a funded game competition. And the market, surprise, is a funded game competition. Okay. You're just like, when you make a commercial game, you're playing with live ammunition. Legal stuff becomes a real consideration. Trademarking your stuff, having a proper LLC in place, having contracts in place to compensate people fairly for their work. And I don't mean promises of percentages of potential royalty. That falls into the middle category of the kind of thing that's really problematic in terms of like, maybe we'll release it commercially, maybe we won't. Now, I've had some people come at me from the perspective of, why would anyone make a game for free? Why would someone do something for free, right? Well, for one thing, there are so many answers to this. I'm just too excited to even, let's try to put them in order, okay? One reason is the same reason why people run marathons, because it's good for them, because it enriches them, because it helps them better understand and better grow. And just as people, we have this need to prove to ourselves we can do things. That's one reason why a lot of people make games just for the hell of it outside of work or their obligations or what they're being paid to do. Another reason is because when it's free from the need to justify market expense, right? When you haven't sunk $80,000, $800,000, $80 million into a project, then you're free to do whatever you'd like with it. You can make it as absurd as you want. You can make it as personal as you want. You can make it as tragic or offensive or political or whatever the hell you feel like saying with it. You can do that if you have no cost to recoup from it because you made it on the expectation you're going to release it for free and haven't spent money doing it, right? There's also obviously ample room for learning and practicing at things at which, you know, it'd be like we might ask the same question of someone, why would you ever do a math equation for free when Boeing is happy to pay engineers? And the reality is because many people are not yet at aeronautical engineer level of experience. And the only way to get there is in fact first to do lots of math problems for the reason not to solve someone else's math problem, but for the reason of us learning how to do those things better. And the same thing applies for game development, where yes, if you're at a top tier level and you know your value in the market and you're ready to get out there and have someone pay you for your work, you know that. You understand how to navigate that system, right? You've made your beginner mistakes somewhere else. You've learned already, whether you went through school, whether you're self-taught, whether you've just accumulated experience from getting out there and just fighting, no matter what it is, that's a different situation than, hey folks, I'm new to this, how do I get started, what do I do? Which there's lots of good answers to, but in the middle there's lots and lots of room for just making things, for just trying things, for exploring, for finding your voice, or the equivalent in the game development sphere, in whatever category you might be in. Now, this is not about how does someone get exploited by doing their work for free, because again, the point is, if you're going out there with a point of this game's going to be released for free, it's much easier to work together on something non-commercially without the expectation of how much are you paying this person to buy off the rights to their work? How much are you giving them up front because the risk is on you as the designer of the project, right? And what I mean by that, right? So, all right. So first off, again, clearly it's a problem if you say, okay, you're going to get 15% of my royalties or revenues or whatever. You got to be really dangerous about there's an important distinction between those two things. If the game ever goes to market and you haven't defined what that means, you haven't defined platforms or timeframes or guarantees or termination clauses or any of that stuff, it's dangerous. So the trade-off, though, is when people try to buy off each other's rights. And they're like, all right, well, so, I'll pay you X number of dollars per art asset you give me, pay you X dollars per sound or whatever other kind of things you do for my work. And if you don't have the contracts in place, you may not actually even have the rights to use that work in your project. And the reason that can become problematic is because after you released your game, if you don't have the rights to their stuff and you're trying to make money off of it, it becomes not all that difficult for them to come after you and get your thing yanked off the store because you don't have the rights to the art or the audio or the stuff that's inside it. Does that make sense? Turns out Berne Convention automatically gives us copyright to the things that we do. Turns out trademark is in many forms, I'm not a lawyer so this isn't legal advice, in many ways some semi-automatic on the things that you're doing to the extent that trademark applies to some of them. All the intellectual property stuff is built to favor the creators, and unless they explicitly sign over the contractual rights to a thing, then it's theirs still. And specifically, so for example, within our club, within Gamedev Club, this is part of why we don't own anyone's stuff. The club doesn't claim rights to anyone's work. If someone builds an art asset, a chunk of code for a Unity component in a Unity project or whatever that they want to sell in the asset store, that they want to put out in TurboSquid, that they want to make a tutorial about, that they want to go use in a future project for a commercial job or whatever, they're welcome to. We'd love for them to, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. The only exception is that in our membership agreement, we do ask, whatever you make for free for inclusion in the game that we release for free, because all club games are released for free, you allow us to keep up there so you don't later shred apart people's portfolios by yanking games down, maybe out of embarrassment over how much your art skills improved or how much of a better coder you've become. We want to be able to keep those portfolio pieces up, or for people to share with their friends and family, or just to look back on fondly or whatever of work they did at a practice level when they're building games together to get experience, to learn things, and so on. Now, another way to think about this distinction of whether or not the game ought to be free or whether or not you ought to be building a commercial game, and again, one is, and I mean this on both sides, right? I don't just mean, do you release it for free or do you charge for it? I also mean, do you keep costs low/0 on it per variable cost or whatever? Or do you invest money in it, right? Do you spend money advertising and marketing and hiring artists and paying for commissioned music rights and all these sort of things to release it on the store for a cost, right? So again, it's two different paths. I treat these two as pretty similar, right? There's very few cases you should spend money, significant sums on a free game, and very few cases where you should spend no money on a real commercial attempt, right? Because like I said, you're competing in a funded market with an unfunded piece in that case. But the other distinction between those two is that, okay, if you think about every now and then, you'll see these posts on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever, where someone's like, hey, everybody, will you check out my blog, right? Or, hey, everyone, look at my art I've put on DeviantArt. And that's a situation where the reason why you're asking them is to do you a favor, or to do that person a favor. They want eyeballs on it, right? You're doing them a favor of they know that their work is early, their work is raw, they're still learning, they're figuring it out, they're trying to get traction. You're doing them a favor to look at it, okay? That's why, in that case, they're usually doing it for practice. They're not being paid to do that. It's because they're getting a lot of control, a lot of say, a lot of authorial choice in how and what they're making, and they can put it out there and do whatever they want with it and have no later obligation to maintain it or do other work related to it. Now, the flip side is, if you have something and I say, will you let me see that? I want that. I want to have that. I want to see it. I want it on a mug. I want it on a t-shirt. I want to play your game. I want to listen to that music. You have something of real value to me. And that's why I'm then buying it from somebody else. That's why you can then sell it to somebody else. If you think about it, and this can be tricky because, of course, our egos can play tricks on us. But when you're putting your work in front of somebody else, is it to do you the favor of getting their feedback on your thing that you're learning how to do? Or is it doing them a favor of it's going to improve and enrich their life to play the game you've worked on? And again, this is tricky because our egos can deceive us. But the amount of effort, time, energy, and polish that really is required for a game to really, in many cases, capture people's imaginations and excite them and get them just thrilled about playing it and so on, are vastly different than the levels of attention, time, and polish we're usually able to shove into a game that we're just doing for practice. That we're just doing because we want to make a thing. We have an outlet for it. Now, speaking of which, another reason for these two different kind of tracks for whether or not is this commercial or is this commercial or is this free is so people in our club. Sorry to always go back to the club, but that's my life right now, right? Some of them are professionals in the game industry. They have jobs working on games where there's money, big money at stake, right? Where there's money coming from funders, money coming from players. They're responsible for parts of products that have to make back that money. Now, because of that, they don't have the same level of creative freedom in those commercial projects because they have to build something that's going to see a return on that investment. In the club for their free projects, they can do whatever the heck they please. They can do weird stuff. They can do stuff about memes. They can do things that are just kind of outside their core skill set. We have a professional game designer who made music on guitar for one of our games, right? We have a guy who professionally does data analytics back end for free-to-play web game, casual stuff, but in the club has just been doing some programming, been doing some design, been exploring other kinds of skills. Does that make sense? And so even within the same skill domain, okay, we've also had cases where there's people who professionally have done, for example, game music or audio on the one hand. And those are on games on Steam, games for sale, games that they were paid for the rights to do their work for under directorial support from from someone on the team saying, I'm paying you, so I'm in control of what you make. Give me another version or whatever. And doing that work in a commercial environment often involves having a producer call and yell at you at 3 a.m. to be like, hey, we need an iteration, needs to pop more, can you make it sound a little more like this, a little less like that? And there's work involved in preparing that kind of music for that kind of setting. And on the other end of the spectrum, on our freeware practice projects that we just do for kicks and fun and our off hours and whatever, then in that case, they look at a game, they say, yeah, I have an idea for how I think that should sound. And they can just whip out a music piece real quick. Oftentimes our musicians give no more than like an evening or whatever to throw some music over the wall. And then we're just so grateful to have the music that we use it exactly as is. There's no pressure. There's no iteration. There's no, like I say, producer coming down on them for like, no, it needs to sound a little more like, for this younger demographic or whatever. It's basically a do what you feel like doing, draw what you feel like drawing, make the music you want to feel like making. Because on these freeware projects, on the practice kind of projects, everyone can be responsible for deciding what they want to do, because part of their reward, part of what they get out of it is experience building the thing they want to build, how they want to build it, trying out their theories, trying out their ideas, without anybody else having much room to disagree with them on, no, do it my way, or no, build this thing. Does that make sense? In a paid environment, there is somebody, whether it's a boss, whether it's a customer, whether it's a Kickstarter backer, whatever, saying, here's what you have to do, and you have to do at an excruciating high level of quality. And on the other end of the spectrum, in a free game environment, it's where you just do what you feel like. And we kind of, hodgepodge them together as best we can. Decoupage, or whatever metaphor might be appropriate. Collage, right? And where it gets to be dangerous in the middle. I run into these people sometimes where they're like, all right, well, this is going to be my first game. And again, this is something one-on-one vetting kind of things. But I always feel bad because I know some of you one-on-one people kind of watch these videos. If you've applied, you're worrying like, is he talking about me? I promise. These are patterns across many people. I'm not talking about one specific person in any case. But like, it would be like, okay, I want my first game to be commercial. I want my first game to be something I can sell. Which, let alone its own problems of scale and scope and so on. But because of that, what that results in is that then they can't get collaborators, and they shouldn't be able to get collaborators to get involved with that because they don't yet have the budget to pay them. But at the same time, they expect to build something of commercial quality and commercial caliber. And the time frame that it takes for a solo individual is usually many years to produce a commercial quality project in this kind of ecosystem. And even then, obviously, like every now and then we hear these great stories of Cave Story or of that Metroidvania kind of whatever it's called, again, I'm blanking on it, where someone will spend 5 or 7 years on their one game and release it, and they do great, and those are inspiring. Then there's the other 100,000 plus people who also did that you don't hear about because their game didn't commercially get any attention or traction at festivals or awards or recognition, and you'll just never hear about it, and that's sad, right? So here's the middle ground, okay? Because it's not quite as black and white as it maybe looks. Here's the middle ground. The middle ground is you build the thing as a proof of concept as a non-commercial project, okay? You throw the ideas out there. You build it. You do something with it. You release it. But that's not yet any level of investment. You're not sinking cost into it. You're not spending a bunch of money on it. You're not hiring people for it. Anyone wants to be involved is just being involved to equally get practice and trying things their way and making their own mistakes and whatever. And it's a free proof of concept. Throw it out there. Try it, okay? Then, if you find that game is doing well and getting traction and getting responses, and there's maybe even festival interest, and you show it to other designers and they're impressed. You show it to other non-designers and they're also impressed. And you're just like, I think we're onto something. That's where it becomes much easier to have a conversation with people who are on that team to be like, y'all, I think we should do something a little more serious with this, right? And then at that point, you don't have to pull that down. That becomes part of your sales piece towards this thing you're investing more real time and energy towards. So this is the same sort of thing that I know this is now eons ago in game industry time, but like Super Meat Boy, because it's obviously a very popular example thanks to Indie Game, the movie, etc., existed first as a free Flash game, right? Smaller in scope, smaller in polish, smaller in execution, smaller in so many ways. But it was that game's success as a free game that helped justify deep, real investment and time into doing it as a commercial project. Does that make sense? Rather than make the mistake of just jumping in headfirst into a multi-year project and then hoping that on the other side there's going to be some sort of validation from the marketplace and reviewers and so on, as we've recently seen, sometimes 4 years on a game and millions of dollars can still get panned by critics. Sad. Instead, you can just put those things out there and just see, right? Develop it. And I don't mean just see if it's going to be commercial or not. I mean see if it's worth doing a version 2.0 of, a director's edition, a super version, a 64 version, whatever attachment, super championship combo turbo hyper you want to choose to use with it, allows you to then figure out, okay, there's proof of audience here. Now, an example of this, right? So Vision by Proxy has been a franchise I worked on 2 of the 3 games for. That game first started as a classroom project, okay? Dr. Celia Pierce, back when she used to be at Georgia Tech, she had a class where it was like a studio environment and people would just build a game together on teams. One of the games from that was this game where it's this really fantastical idea of you're an alien, you see the world through different people's eyes to solve kind of these navigational puzzles, and it was an incredibly tiny game at first. A good game, a pretty game, I have to credit to everyone involved. But it was obviously at a completely non-commercial scale of production. It was obviously the side product of people who had limited time constraints. They had classroom obligations, right? They had work and jobs and other things to worry about. But the game did well enough that it landed them at E3 showing at the Indiecade booth. Their game, which is pretty cool, right? And this is now years ago. That was enough traction or outside validation to then justify bringing on new and different team members who could provide more art expertise over a longer period of time. That's also when I joined to help redevelop from the ground up the engine, so we had a lot bigger, richer world with more dynamic camera panning, with more dynamic puzzle transitions, with more impressive eye effects for how the alien is blinded by our sun on Earth and so on. But that justification, that was all justified as a longer-term project by first the external validation of having released a smaller version. That game, Vision by Proxy's second edition, then went on to get 7 million plays worldwide, about half of which were in China, where it was called iMonster 3, for reasons that we can't make sense out of, because there was no, this is the second edition. Anyway, iMonster 3, and so again, 7 million plays, which was then further validation. So when we built Miss Vision by Proxy, we were able to justify growing the team by a size of 2 or 3. So instead of just being 4 of us, there were now 11 or 12 of us, with actual specific help on writing, on music, on other aspects, sound, as having specialization from all these people in addition to our core team we kept. Okay, and this was still a non-commercial project at this point, because this was still for us. We wanted to get out there. We want to keep building momentum. But this is also the point where we started getting contacted by companies who were asking, is there some way that they could license it? Is there some way that they could put their logo in front of it? Is there some way that they could help us publish it? They could help put it in front of people. Could they port it to a certain, like an iPad for us or something? And we, as a team, were able to discuss, we have this momentum, we have this validation, we have these offers because of the success that we found from building things that we knew we put out in a package, we put in a bundle as a free project, put it out there for outside validation without the same sort of financial risk of expecting just chucking money into it, counting on this to hold us afloat. Does that make sense? And this is one of these things that actually allows you the greater freedom and flexibility to try and take bigger risks when you're not heavily investing in the cost of production for these proofs of concept you're putting out there. Okay? Because if you're sinking a lot of money into a project, then it limits the number of things you can try to release in a much different way than if the main limitation is your time that you're putting into these, and that allows you to keep a much longer runway. You can try more ideas. You can try more different kinds of things. You can plant more seeds to see which grow. Because part of any creative industry, whether it's video games or films or novel writing or poetry or dance or whatever, is simply impossible to tell how people will respond to it until it exists in some form. Right? You have to give it shape to then put it in front of people and be like, how do you like this? Right? How is this? In the video game, it's so easy now to give it worldwide to people, to put it in front of people and find out, get some outside validation. Do they like it? Is it any good? You know, one of the things, I love this point, I'm always forgetting which speaker gave this talk some years ago, but I found it really inspiring. But she was talking about how if people love your product enough, they're going to oversee a bunch of garbage to get at it and enjoy it and appreciate it. And they're going to overlook all its faults. Okay, now my favorite example of this is Minecraft, right? Because what a train wreck that was for so many years. Okay, I mean, like literally just didn't work half the time, full of bugs and glitches, but and it was a pain to use, it was a pain to run, it was tricky, it was a problematic thing, customer service was bad, etc. But it didn't matter, right? We had like 11-year-olds clawing their way through learning how to install and use Linux to run a dedicated server so their neighbor could play Minecraft together. Okay, we had my first podcast interview was a 9-year-old kid, at the time a kid, now he's a teenager, who learned how to program specifically to make mods for Minecraft because he was just so enamored with the need to add magic and spells and another world to this game. right? And the game was a disaster at the time when he was doing that. Okay, this was now years ago. This isn't the modern C++ optimized version you have on Windows 10 and the version on PS4 that's been ported and all that stuff. This was a disaster, JavaScript, bad frame rate, full of glitches, people building booster cart things online based on how the gravity and physics didn't work right for carts and stuff, right? This was, people overlooked the faults. And in the same way, we look at something like Vision Proxy, the original version that I didn't work on directly, and people overlooked its size and its scope because it's the idea, it just excited them. In a way that if you just tell someone that idea, there's a million ways you could execute on it. They can't tell whether or not interest them or not. But when a group of people had put together their heads and built this game together as just a free project to put it out there and try to see if people received it well, they did. And that helped fuel them and motivate and justify further time investment, which then moved us, like I say, forward down a couple iterations later. We got to the point where there were serious commercial offers on the table about what we could or couldn't do with this project from Miss Vision by Proxy. Does that make sense? And so, again, there's this middle ground, but the middle ground is not, I'm going to make this game and then we might then see if it's going to be commercial or not. You're playing with live ammunition when you go into making a commercial game. Okay, you're expected to be seriously invested into its production, and the kind of games you're competing against have done the same. Instead, if possible, like I'm saying, that's where it makes sense, I think, to do the free projects, which there's so many reasons for it. It's an outlet. It's proof to ourselves of a skill mastery, of discipline, of personal development. It's allowing us to explore our ideas in our ways with no boss, with no one our master, right? These are things that are all unique to the space of when you make a game for free that don't necessarily apply if you're making a game commercially. Does that make sense? But one of these can lead to the other. Doesn't always. Now, the other thing I like to point out about the making stuff for free thing, right, is that it's been a while since I've hit this drum, but I used to bang on it all the time. Okay, I used to play soccer as a kid. I played some baseball as a kid. I was a wrestler in high school, etc. I haven't done any of those things professionally. I do not consider myself a failure of a soccer player or a baseball player or a wrestler on the grounds that I didn't do it professionally. It was still an enriching, valuable part of my life, right? It helped give me more ways of seeing the world. I took woodshop. I learned a lot from woodshop. I know how to use a jack plane now if I need to fix my door being stuck, right? I didn't fail at it because I'm not a carpenter now. That's just not how the real world of skills and hobbies and enthusiasts work. Instead, it's this valid, enriching thing that adds to your life. And so in the same way, if you want to make games and you don't want to make games professionally, you're not failing at it, right? You didn't do it wrong any more than the person who learns to dance but is not a professional dancer. Any more than the person who learns how to paint but isn't a professional painter. Screw that garbage. Screw that nonsense, right? You can do it, and it can still be a part of you, and it can still be a part of who you are and how you think and how you live. And some of the people that I work with, for example, for one-on-one training, some people who are in our club, they have a stable job as a software engineer, and they're happy with that line of work. It's outside of games, which frankly pays them better and more reliably, and the company's more likely to exist 2 years down the line, and allows them to live in a nicer house and pay their kids through college. And on the side, they can make whatever games they feel like on the side, in whatever time frame they feel like, about whatever themes they want, without any pressure or concerns about, like, right now, in-app purchases are a big deal. Or, oh, it's all about the icon. Or castles right now are real hot. How do we get on this castle phase? None of that garbage. Make whatever they feel like. And more often than not, when I talk to people who want to get into making games, there's a part of our heads that mixes up this idea that, like, oh, because I want to make games, I need to be doing it as my job. When the reality is, it's kind of not that close to the truth. And that, with a lot of people, because let's say make a decision about, and you're making a game, right? You could make more the kind of game you feel like making. And this is like a million decisions for making games, right? Each decision along the way. There comes a split in the road, oftentimes. There's the direction that's more what you feel like doing. And there's the direction that's more what it seems like, as best as you can tell, the market would actually reward or encourage or want to see, right? And there's all examples for all over this place, right? Like, maybe you really like hard games, but you've seen hard games get slammed on Steam, right? Or maybe you really like games with a rich, deep, complex control interface. Like maybe like me, you grew up on MechWarrior 2, and you want to use every key on the keyboard. But you've also seen that increasingly simpler controls seem to often do better in the market because they don't overwhelm, because they can map to a joypad and all kinds of other things, right? Or maybe it's something where there's just a story you want to tell, but like you think it might be kind of alienating to some people. Or it might be kind of weirdly personal or whatever. These are things that if you're not heavily investing in a game commercially or financially, you can take your route and do whatever you want with it. Where the pressure becomes really tough, really challenging is when you're trying to make back costs because you've been sinking a bunch of money into it That's where you have to start making those different kinds of decisions. And as soon as you've gone down that path enough times, as soon as you've come to enough forks in the road and gone the direction not of what you felt like making, but instead the direction of what you think is more likely to be most profitable, soon enough, you may as well have a job at someone else's company building their game, right? And that can sound rough, but maybe it's exactly how I mean it. Because for many people, they're after making the game they want to make, which they may learn, they may find, right? I mean, because what happens, and I see this, I've seen people who've gone the route of going through game development college or going through game development school or training programs or boot camps or even just spending many years of their life earning enough of a credentialed reputation and portfolio to get themselves into a career track. And then they see when they're at the entry level, like, okay, there's so many rungs of ladder up before I get to be creative director, right? Before I can become lead designer on a project. And along the way, they're jumping jobs, they're shifting studios, right? I've been on Earth long enough and know enough game developers. I've seen some people who make their way up that ladder. And one of the things that they learn is that whether they go to the top of that studio and then lead the studio, whether they quit and go to the indie thing with their professional credential background, in either case, they still have bosses if they're doing it as a business, right? It's the shareholders, it's the board members, it's the marketing department, it's the CEO, it's the customers, right? It's the customers who then hold you accountable to you have to keep maintaining this thing you've made before, to this thing that it has to work in every browser, to this thing that it has to work on every device, to this thing of have you tested thoroughly to ensure that every iOS version and every Android version on every modern device out in the platform sphere does it work fine, because if it doesn't, you're getting hammered on the ratings and reviews from them, right? Of customer support needing to be a real thing, invested in, and so on. Speaking of which, there's also one other thought. I realize I've crammed a lot of stuff, really thrown a lot at you, but I'm going to throw one more thing in there. And that's that I think increasingly, when I got started, when I was an indie game developer, when I was making my early iPhone games that did phenomenally well for the publisher, not for me, I made some games that paid my rent for a couple years, but the real money came from the games I made for publishers. And that's probably because they were funded, and so I was able to better pay artists and other people through that kind of channel. But in that market space of 2008, 2009, 2010, iPhone and iPad, whole different world, right? A lot of indie developers at that point were just soloing a project. Okay, and increasingly, even though there's still some rare exceptions to that, increasingly, when I talk to people for interviews for my podcast, game devs like you, about their indie success in the market, whether it's on Steam, whether it's on iOS, whether it's on some mix, whether it's on itch.io or some other platform, increasingly, it's a team of 4 or 6 or 8 AAA level developers who quit their day jobs and got on the life raft together to escape corporate of doing indie games together. And anymore, that story is more common, of these companies who have to operate at a completely different scale of operation and skill and experience level than just one person or 2 people hanging out in a basement or one person or 2 people hanging out in a garage or whatever. Anymore, that space is pretty heavily carpet bombed of possibility by people who are doing game jams, people who are doing club projects, people doing classroom projects. The non-commercial space is understandably saturated with work, which also is not on the same tier as people pulling 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks together with professional background skills and connections, right? And when you enter the market space, independent included, that's who you're competing against. Customers don't care what your background is in, unless maybe the press might. But what really makes the difference is that it's a playing field out there where you're right up neck and neck on the same App Store charts, the same Steam charts, the same fighting for feature promotion, which people manage it, but it's rough. And the reason I say this too is to point out that I think some people get the mistaken impression that indie is a bridge into getting a job in a studio. Right? And sometimes this is from a confusion of whether or not by indie we mean indie commercial game developer, or we just mean making games at all, which is part of what I tend to refer to as hobbyist or amateur or practice, or this is not to be disparaging of it, it's to help distinguish. There's commercial indie game development where we're spending money, expecting to make money out of it, usually at a level of investment and commercial market validation, separate from we're just making games. Class projects, club projects, solo projects, learning projects, etc. Right? It's a distinction we make. But because especially the terms get conflated, is that people will see it as, I'm going to get some games on the store, get some stuff on the App Store, get some stuff out of Unity, whatever, and then maybe I try to get a job at some game company, not realizing that really among commercially profitable indies, a disproportionate number of them are ex-AAA, are ex-studio developers, people who already have the professional experience, have seen how it works at their workplace, have gained some connections that way, have gained a network of former coworkers who've gone elsewhere that they can then tap for skills to get professional level design, professional music, professional audio, professional whatever. And that's something that increasingly, like I say, it's a life raft for AAA people who are either downsized when an entire studio gets swept off the map because some giant publisher decides that they're no longer going to renew a license for a certain franchise, which happens all the time, or because of margins getting tighter, or it's like I talked about Casper Gray on the Game Devs Like You podcast, where he was talking about how even though games market has gotten bigger, right, 2x, 3 times the size it used to be, in that same time, the cost for production for these games has gone up by 10x, 100x. Okay, again, 2x or 3x audience size growth. So it looks to us like video games market is just growing and growing, but 10x to 100x cost increase for these console games and commercial scale PC games, etc., has really, really tightened up the margins on that high end for studios, which has led some people to even see from internally, right? If you want to talk about how there's a lot of sequels at E3, and I realize I'm in rambling mode, but forgive me. Developers know this, right? Developers realize that they're making remakes of remakes or sequel number 13 or port of game that's already existed, etc. And sometimes they feel that pain. And once they have the reputation and experience necessary, that's when they want to cut out of there and go try to do their thing. But they're going into it with a lot better, different kind of momentum if they're using it as, like I say, a life raft from AAA instead of thinking it's going to build them a bridge into AAA. In fact, that's also why a lot of the indies who've been commercially successfully, you don't necessarily see them. How many of them have faded off and gone to Ubisoft or gone on to Microsoft or Activision? And a few have. But disproportionately, a lot of them don't, because that's why they got out of there. To not have to take orders from the boss, to not have to fight upstream to convince 8 other people, 9 other people of every idea, every code check-in that they have and they want to do, and just be able to do their own thing and have say over it, right? Does this make sense? All right, so I realize I threw a lot at you, but let's go back to the beginning of this, which is to say that whether or not you're going to do a game for free to release it for free, whether or not you're going to do a game to spend money on it and hope to make money out of it, these should be different tracks that you should go into knowing up front which one you're doing, and that the middle ground isn't to say, I'm going to make this game and I might sell it eventually. That just cuts you off from all kinds of Creative Commons attribution assets, from all kinds of potential mentors, from all kinds of potential help, from all kinds of potential collaborators. Instead, it is to make the game for free, to make the thing, to release the thing as you promised, when you said you would, in the way you said you would, for free. As just a freeware, put it out there, get some attention on it, express yourself, take your risks, do whatever you choose to do with it. Then and there, when and if that gets recognition, and maybe, it's so, I'm talking about keeping costs low. I didn't say maybe necessarily zero, but chuck it, submit it to Indiecade, submit it to festivals, submit it to, Siege or whatever, and see if you can get some recognition on it. Maybe contact press about it, but if and when it picks up traction, or people watch the YouTube video, or people download it, or people play it on Congregate or itch.io or whatever portals you choose to use, that's when it becomes easier to justify, all right, we're going to make a premium version. Right? We're going to get real investment in it. We're going to get real backing between it. Or even, hell, to go to Kickstarter with that and say, hey, everybody, people played our game. They had a wonderful time with it. We don't want to give up control of what we're doing to a publishing layer. So if you'll help fund us, we can show you this already fun game you've enjoyed, this game you've already recognized, and we want to take it to the next level. Kickstart us because we've shown you we can do it. That's a whole better deal than when people try to go to Kickstarter with this vague promise of this thing that they've never even kind of started building, right? Does this all make sense? So anyway, like I said, I feel like I'm throwing too much at you, but that's it for today. Chris DeLeon here of GamKedo.com. That's GAMKEDO. There's no E in the middle. It's not Game Keto. It's GamKedo, which every other day I kind of regret. But hey, have a great day today. Make some video games. I look forward to playing your games in the future. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.